The sun spilled golden light through the stained glass windows of the small Tennessee church, casting fragmented rainbows across the wooden pews. Outside, birds chirped, the town humming with the quiet rhythm of Sunday morning routines. Inside, the congregation swayed gently, their voices rising in a harmonious hymn, the melody both comforting and solemn. It was a place of trust, of faith, of routine. But beneath its polished veneer, a dark secret was stirring. At the pulpit stood Pastor Matthew Cole, a man whose smile radiated warmth and whose words carried authority. Every gesture, every pause, seemed deliberate, effortless. "Let us open our hearts to his guidance," he intoned, his voice smooth, commanding yet intimate. Congregants nodded, eyes shining with reverence, unaware that the man they adored concealed shadows no one suspected. Seated near the front, 16-year-old Clara adjusted the strap of her cardigan nervously. Her fingers clutched something hidden. In her pocket, her phone. Her chest tightened with anticipation and fear as she glanced at her father figure, the man she loved and feared in equal measure. She had been planning this for weeks, carefully memorizing the rhythm of the sermons, the moments when she could record without being noticed. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed the record button, slipping the phone deeper into her pocket. A bead of sweat traced the side of her temple. "You have to know the truth," she thought, heart hammering. "For them, for me, for all of us." The pastor's prayer carried on, soft at first, then swelling with intensity. We must open ourselves to love, to guidance, to understanding. His words, meant to comfort, carried a subtle undertone, a familiarity that made Clara's stomach knot. Certain phrases, almost too intimate, too personal, made her cheeks flush, shame mingling with dread. She shifted in her seat, listening, recording, her mind a chaotic whirl of affection, fear, and suspicion. Clara's gaze swept the congregation. No one noticed the flicker of unease in her eyes, the slight tension in her posture. They were lost. In the collective devotion, smiles serene, voices in unison. They can't see it. They wouldn't understand. She clenched her fists beneath her knees, a silent anchor in a sea of appearances. As the pastor's hand swept across the Bible, quoting verses with fervor, a chill ran down her spine. Words that had once brought comfort now felt like chains, manipulative and poised with hidden intent. She remembered moments over the past months, lingering touches disguised as guidance, quiet whispers meant only for her ears, a warmth that had shifted subtly into something darker. The recording captured it all, each subtle inflection, each hidden implication. Her heart wrenched with guilt. She loved him. She truly did. But the fear clawing at her throat was undeniable. She thought of her younger sisters, oblivious. There, trust a fragile thing, in a house that now felt like a cage. I have to protect them. I have to. Pastor Cole's eyes swept the room, occasionally lingering on her, unassuming yet calculating. Behind the charm, behind the laughter and sermons, a shadow lurked, one Clara could sense but could barely confront. Each word he spoke, each gentle motion, was a calculated step in a dangerous dance. The congregation sang on, unaware of the storm hidden in the heart of the sanctuary. Clara's breath came in shallow bursts, her phone pressed to her side like a lifeline. Love and fear, devotion and dread twisted together in an uneasy knot. One small recording, one secret action could unravel everything, shattering the facade of piety and trust. And in that quiet, sacred morning, as sunlight fractured through the stained glass, Clara knew that the Sunday service that had always promised comfort and community would become the first step into a truth too heavy for the world to bear. Life in the Cole household carried a carefully curated sense of perfection. From the outside, it was a picture of warmth and devotion, walls adorned with family photos, shelves lined with neatly stacked hymnals, and the faint aroma of fresh-baked bread wafting from the kitchen. Pastor Matthew Cole's generosity and piety were legendary in their small Tennessee town. To outsiders, he was the embodiment of virtue, the rock of the community. Inside, however, the facade concealed a labyrinth of manipulation, subtle coercion, and carefully masked danger. Clara, the eldest adopted daughter at 16, felt the weight of that duality every day. Intelligent, observant, and fiercely protective. Of her younger sisters, she navigated her home with caution. She craved the parental love that had been denied her early in life, yet she sensed something inherently wrong in her father figure's attention, a hidden layer of control that made her heart race with unease. Her mornings were punctuated by polite smiles and careful obedience, but beneath the surface, anxiety simmered, constantly reminding her of the unspoken truths she could neither share nor ignore. The younger daughters, barely old enough to grasp the complexities surrounding them, remained blissfully unaware. Their trust in Matthew Cole was unshakable, a naive mirror of the community's own devotion. Clara often caught herself imagining their innocence shattered if the truth ever surfaced, a thought that tightened her chest and made her stomach churn. She would watch them laugh over breakfast, carefree and trusting, and a mix of protectiveness and despair surged through her. I have to shield them. They can't see what I see. Outside the home, the world mirrored the same kind of blind faith. Church members greeted Pastor Cole with smiles, handshakes, and admiration, unaware of the calculated precision behind his every gesture. Neighbors nodded politely as he passed, while teachers or friends occasionally noticed subtle oddities, an uncomfortably lingering glance, a dismissive rebuke, but dismissed them, chalking it up to stress, personality quirks, or misinterpretation. This collective blindness isolated Clara even further, leaving her trapped in a moral and emotional limbo. The history of adoption added another layer of complexity. Years earlier, Pastor Cole had opened his home to 3 young girls in need of stability, earning praise from both the congregation and the wider community. His acts of generosity had been sincere, or at least convincing enough to mask his darker inclinations. Family dinners, church outings, and volunteer projects painted a narrative of care and piety. Yet behind closed doors, Clara had begun to notice subtle patterns, lingering touches disguised as guidance, intimate conversations that left her unsettled, and a warmth in his gaze that didn't belong to a father figure. Over time, these seemingly minor incidents accumulated into a web of psychological tension. Clara's internal monologues became her refuge and her torment. Am I overreacting? Is it really him? Or am I imagining this? These thoughts battled against instinctual warnings, each memory and observation layering into a suffocating awareness that something was deeply wrong. She rationalized and hid evidence, not out of fear for herself alone, but to protect her sisters from a reality too painful for children. The weight of silence pressed on her shoulders, a burden she carried with a mix of guilt, dread, and reluctant determination. Matthew Cole's manipulative tendencies were subtle yet relentless. He wielded his authority with precision, blending emotional praise with guilt-laden whispers, a reprimand delivered with concern, a compliment wrapped in expectation. Every interaction became a tool of control. Clara recognized the patterns, but felt powerless to challenge them directly. The tension in the house was tangible, an invisible current that made every conversation and gesture fraught with moral ambiguity. Even moments of ordinary family life carried emotional complexity. Breakfasts were silent affairs, punctuated by the soft clatter of utensils. Yet beneath the normalcy, Clara's mind raced. She noticed the way her father lingered near her younger sisters, how his smiles sometimes felt like traps, how his words could simultaneously comfort and unsettle. Love and fear intertwined, creating a psychological maze from which she could see no exit. The community's unwavering trust amplified Clara's isolation. While the world celebrated Pastor Cole's leadership, she carried the knowledge of a hidden danger, a secret that threatened to shatter not only her family, but the very foundation of trust that surrounded them. Each day was a careful balancing act. Attending church with the right expressions, smiling when neighbors visited, and hiding the tremors of fear and suspicion that rattled her from within. In this environment, the psychological tension was relentless. Clara's intelligence became both a gift and a curse. It allowed her to recognize manipulation and foresee potential dangers, but it also made her painfully aware of the limited avenues for action. Her love for the pastor conflicted with the fear that gnawed at her gut, creating a moral dilemma she carried silently. Every choice was weighted with consequence, every glance and word measured against the potential fallout. By the end of each day, she retreated to her room, her sanctuary, and her cage, replaying interactions and imagining outcomes. She wrestled with questions of trust, morality, and justice. Could she expose the truth without destroying her family? Could she protect her sisters without putting herself in danger? And above all, could she survive the emotional labyrinth she found herself trapped within, in a house that promised love but delivered control? Clara's phone sat quietly in her pocket, a silent witness to the patterns she had observed for months. Each subtle shift in her father's tone, each lingering glance, had become fodder for the recordings she had carefully collected. Today, the hum of Sunday service provided both cover and tension, the notes of hymns masking the pulse of fear that thumped in her chest. She replayed in her mind the last few weeks, small incidents that seemed insignificant at the time, but now formed a troubling tapestry, a hand lingering too long on a shoulder, a whispered compliment that made her skin crawl, a joke meant to unsettle, yet disguised as concern. With each recording, her conviction grew, but so did the fear. If he finds out, what will happen to me? To my sisters? Pastor Cole began noticing subtle changes in her behavior. He watched her shift in her seat, caught the occasional sidelong glance, and commented in his soothing, authoritative tone. "Clara, you've been quiet lately. Is something on your mind?" His smile was warm, but it carried the weight of expectation. She forced a small nod, hiding the tremor in her hands. He's watching. Always watching. The younger daughters continued to play near the pews, blissfully unaware, their laughter piercing through the tension that clung to Clara like a second skin. Protecting them had become her mission, a responsibility that both strengthened her resolve and burdened her heart. Every whispered warning, every private observation of her father's behavior intensified her anxiety. She felt like a spy in her own home, the phone in her pocket, a secret lifeline. The pastor's manipulation was subtle but relentless. He praised her for attentiveness, weaving guilt and obligation into his words. "I trust you, Clara," he said one evening, as they cleared hymnals from the pews. "Not everyone can understand what it means to serve the family, to uphold faith. You're special in that regard." Clara forced a smile, the warmth in his tone now tinged with coercion. She recognized the pattern. The more he praised, the more isolated and compliant he expected her to become. Whispers in private moments intensified the moral complexity of her world. In the quiet of the living room after dinner, he would speak of devotion, of obedience, of understanding one's place in the family. Clara felt the pull of love mixed with terror. She wrestled with conflicting emotions, affection for the man who had given her a home, and the instinctive recoil at the subtle control he exerted. Her recordings began to serve another purpose. Proof. A tether to reality in a house that felt increasingly surreal. Each playback revealed nuances she had missed in the moment. The way his voice shifted when no one else was looking, the undertones of dominance lurking beneath seemingly innocent words. Clara knew she couldn't rely solely on her perception. She needed evidence, a way to substantiate the dread gnawing at her gut. Outside, neighbors occasionally noted the oddities, small glimpses of tension, but dismissed them. "Children can be dramatic," one teacher had remarked after noticing Clara's withdrawn demeanor at school. "And teenagers, well, they're always observing, always questioning." No one saw the full picture, the invisible web of manipulation and fear Clara navigated daily. As weeks passed, tension escalated. The pastor's actions became bolder, yet carefully calibrated to avoid obvious suspicion. Clara's moral struggle deepened. She wanted to expose him, to protect her sisters. Yet each day's silence and compliance felt like complicity. The psychological burden was immense. Each decision weighed with potential consequences for herself and those she loved. One evening, she overheard him speaking with a church member about the importance of trust. "Faith is about knowing who to follow," he said smoothly. "Those who doubt are easily led astray." Clara felt a chill. He was speaking directly to her, cloaked in generality, a reminder of his authority and her entrapment. Fear, love, loyalty, and moral obligation collided inside her, creating an internal storm she could neither calm nor escape. Clara's protective instincts sharpened. She found herself observing her sisters more intently, noting moments of vulnerability, a scraped knee, a tearful smile, an innocent question. They all became reminders of the stakes. Her recordings were no longer just proof. They were a weapon and a shield, the only means by which she might confront the darkness she had been forced to endure silently. The atmosphere in the home grew increasingly tense. Small incidents, the way he lingered in doorways, the careful monitoring of the youngest daughter's routines, amplified her sense of urgency. Every moment became a test. Could she maintain composure, continue collecting evidence, and protect those who depended on her? Internal doubts and rationalizations consumed her nights. Maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Each thought, each replay of a recording, refuted her doubts. The truth was there, undeniable in the subtle inflections of his voice, in the calculated proximity he maintained. Clara realized that waiting could mean more harm to those she loved most. Action was necessary, but the cost remained unclear, the danger ever present. By the end of each day, she lay awake in her room, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling, her mind racing. She thought of the pastor's charm, the community's trust, the innocence of her sisters, and the fragile line she was walking. The moral and emotional stakes had never been higher, and the web of secrecy, fear, and manipulation tightened around her like a vice. Every small decision carried weight. Every observation could either protect or imperil those she loved. The tension was a living thing in the Cole household, wrapping itself around Clara, whispering that exposure was inevitable, that truth would demand confrontation, and that courage would come at a cost she had only begun to comprehend. Clara could feel the weight of the evidence in her pocket, the small phone pressing into her side as if reminding her that the moment of truth had arrived. For months, she had watched, listened, and recorded, navigating a house that felt more like a cage with every passing day. Today, the tension had reached a breaking point. Pastor Matthew Cole's eyes lingered on her longer than usual during morning prayers. There was an unspoken challenge in his gaze, subtle but unmistakable. Clara's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to appear calm. Not yet, she told herself. Wait for the right moment. Later, in the quiet of the family room, he approached her. "Clara," he said softly, the warmth in his voice belying a dangerous undercurrent. "You've been distant lately. Is there something troubling you?" She swallowed hard, steadying her breath. I just have a lot on my mind," she replied, voice trembling despite her efforts to hide it. Her hands brushed the pocket where the phone lay, the lifeline that had carried her fears into proof. He crouched slightly, lowering his voice. "You know I care about you, right? Everything I do. It's for you, for the family. You must trust me." His words, carefully layered with love and authority, threatened to suffocate her. She knew the manipulation all too well, yet she could not allow it to deter her from the truth she had to reveal. The private confrontation began in earnest. Clara took a deep breath, summoning courage she didn't know she possessed. I recorded some of your words," she admitted, her voice quivering but firm. "I need someone to hear them. I need help." For a moment, His expression flickered, a subtle mask slipping. Then, carefully, he composed himself. "Clara, you don't understand. I was only trying to guide you, to teach you what is right. You're exaggerating." His tone was calm, persuasive, and dangerous. "I'm not exaggerating," she insisted, her eyes burning with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I have proof. You can't hide it anymore." The room was charged with electric tension, the quiet, punctuated only by their measured breaths. For the first time, Pastor Cole's control faltered. He moved closer, attempting to intimidate, but Clara stood her ground, the months of fear and silence boiling into determination. The turning point arrived as she played the recordings. Voices, words, and subtle manipulations filled the room, undeniable in their implication. His hands clenched slightly, a flash of anger passing across his otherwise composed demeanor. The power he wielded over her and her sisters, over the community, was now exposed in plain evidence. You recorded this?" he whispered, almost incredulously. The veneer of authority cracked, revealing the man beneath the pastor's mask. "Yes," Clara said, holding her ground. "And it ends today. You've manipulated us for too long." The confrontation escalated, a battle of wills and courage. Pastor Cole's voice rose, a mix of fury and panic. But Clara remained steadfast, the moral clarity she had been seeking for months guiding her words and actions. Every plea, every attempt to sway her, fell flat against the undeniable truth. Finally, she took the recordings to a trusted family friend and local authorities. Shock and disbelief rippled through those who had once held unwavering faith in him. Conversations that had been casual, smiles that had been warm, and gestures of authority now carried the weight of betrayal. The pastor's immediate consequences were swift. Arrested and confronted by law enforcement, his public persona collapsed. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the man they had trusted with the abuser the evidence revealed. The younger daughters, initially confused and frightened, clung to Clara, their bond strengthened by the shared recognition of danger and the courage it took to expose him. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Clara processed a complex torrent of emotions: relief at the exposure, guilt for the months of silence, fear for the repercussions, and pride in her own courage. Her internal struggle did not end with his arrest. The emotional and psychological impact would echo through the family for years. Justice had been set in motion, but the cost was clear. The family's trust, the community's faith, and Clara's own innocence had been irrevocably altered. She had acted, finally, but at the intersection of moral duty and personal sacrifice, a place where courage is born from fear and truth from prolonged darkness. And as the house grew quiet, with her sisters finally safe and the evidence secured, Clara understood that confronting the darkness was only the beginning. There would be hearings, scrutiny, and judgment from those who once adored him, but the moral resolution, the act of standing for justice, belonged to her. It was a victory carved from courage, fear, and unwavering determination. The arrest of Pastor Matthew Cole sent shockwaves through the small Tennessee town. Neighbors whispered in disbelief, congregants struggled to reconcile their faith with betrayal, and the local news picked up the story with the kind of urgency that turned quiet Sundays into chaotic days of speculation. Clara's evidence, the recordings she had collected in secret, was irrefutable, leaving no room for denial. Inside the house, the atmosphere was heavy with relief and fear. The younger daughters clung to Clara, their small hands gripping hers, as if she were the anchor keeping the world from tipping into darkness. "Is he really gone?" one whispered, her voice trembling. Clara nodded, though inside she felt a mix of pride and lingering dread. The danger had passed for now, but the scars of fear and manipulation would linger. Legal proceedings began swiftly. Authorities meticulously examined the recordings, cross-referencing timelines and interviewing the family and neighbors. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of the pastor's carefully constructed facade. Clara testified, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, recounting the months of manipulation, fear, and subtle abuse. Her courage inspired awe even among seasoned officers, though the emotional toll was evident. The courtroom became a stage for confrontation, a place where the private horrors of the home were laid bare for public scrutiny. Pastor Cole maintained a veneer of calm but subtle slips, an almost imperceptible twitch, a fleeting glare, betrayed the cracks in his mask. Witnesses corroborated Clara's story, and the community, forced to confront uncomfortable truths, grappled with the collision of faith and reality. Meanwhile, the family began the slow, painstaking process of healing. Therapy sessions offered a space for the younger daughters to express confusion, fear, and anger. Clara's own recovery was complex. Pride in her actions mingled with guilt for months of silence and the heavy responsibility of exposing her father. "I did what I had to do," she told herself during long nights of reflection. But why did it take so long to feel safe? The community's reaction was mixed. Some members rallied around the family, offering support and acknowledging the courage it took to confront such a betrayal. Others recoiled, unable to reconcile the man they had revered with the predator he had revealed himself to be. Gossip spread like wildfire, straining friendships and dividing congregants, while the local media framed the story with sensational headlines that both protected and endangered the family's privacy. Even within the safety of home, tension lingered. Clara watched over her sisters with vigilant care, aware that trauma would take time to fade. Every bedtime routine, every whispered reassurance, became an act of love and protection. She carried the knowledge that while the immediate threat had been removed, the emotional consequences of abuse, secrecy, and betrayal would echo for years. At school and in public spaces, Clara and her sisters faced stares and questions they were not prepared to answer. "Your dad, the pastor?" one classmate had asked, voice tinged with disbelief. Clara simply nodded, offering a tight-lipped smile. The world had changed in an instant, and the fragile safety of anonymity had been shattered. Through it all, the recordings remained a testament, not only of abuse, but of courage. Clara had transformed fear into action, secrecy into justice. The act of gathering evidence, of navigating the moral complexity of family and loyalty, had empowered her, even as it left indelible marks on her psyche. Each day, she reminded herself that exposing the truth had been necessary, that protecting her sisters had been paramount, and that she had faced the impossible with resolve. The town slowly began to adjust, but the impact of betrayal lingered. Families spoke in hushed tones, congregants scrutinized behavior, and the story became a cautionary tale whispered in homes and schools. Justice had been served in the courtroom, but the emotional courtroom, the space of private grief, reflection, and recovery, was ongoing, demanding resilience, compassion, and time. And in the quiet moments, when the younger daughters slept and the house settled into stillness, Clara allowed herself to breathe, to release a fraction of the fear and tension she had carried for so long. The danger had passed, the truth had been revealed, and the moral responsibility had been fulfilled. Yet she understood that healing, both hers and her family's, was a journey only beginning, a testament to the enduring consequences of betrayal and the power of courage born from fear. Clara often reflected on the months that had brought her family from quiet fear to public exposure. The journey had been harrowing, a test of courage, morality, and resilience. She had navigated a labyrinth of secrecy and manipulation, weighed down by guilt and uncertainty, yet ultimately emerged as the force that confronted a darkness many had ignored. She thought about the delicate line between love and fear, the way trust could be twisted into control, and how silence, though instinctively protective, could become complicity. The pastor, once a symbol of guidance and safety, had exploited both the devotion of the community and the vulnerability of his own daughters. Clara realized that evil often wears the guise of warmth, kindness, and authority, and that recognizing it requires both courage and clarity. The younger sisters, innocent yet perceptive in their own ways, had survived the shadow of manipulation because Clara had acted. Their laughter slowly returned, fragile but genuine, as therapy and open conversation allowed them to reclaim agency over their lives. Each small step toward healing reinforced the importance of vigilance, honesty, and self-advocacy, lessons they would carry into adulthood. The community, shaken but gradually resilient, had begun to understand the limits of outward appearances. Faith and admiration, while powerful, were not substitutes for accountability. Conversations emerged about boundaries, vigilance, and the importance of listening to the vulnerable. Clara recognized that her actions had ripple effects beyond her family. She had challenged not only the abuser, but also the collective blindness that enabled him. For Clara, the moral clarity came with a bittersweet edge. Courage had been necessary, but the cost had been profound. Fractured trust, public scrutiny, and the weight of knowing the betrayal of someone so close. Yet she embraced the lesson that fear, while paralyzing, could be transformed into action. The right choice, even when terrifying, held the power to protect and to reclaim agency from those who sought to control. She also understood the complexity of human emotion. Love and loyalty, when exploited, could become tools of oppression, but they could also become the foundation for courage and justice. By confronting the abuse, Clara reclaimed not only her family's safety, but also the integrity of her own moral compass. Ultimately, the story of the Cole family became a cautionary tale, a reminder that appearances can deceive, that evil often hides behind benevolence, and that bravery sometimes means standing alone against those we once trusted. Clara carried the scars of betrayal, but also the profound knowledge that truth, courage, and moral conviction could triumph, even in the darkest of circumstances. Her final reflection was simple yet powerful. Fear can teach, secrecy can protect, but action, guided by integrity and empathy, can save lives. And in that, Clara found a quiet strength, the assurance that even in the shadow of manipulation and abuse, courage and truth endure.